Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Yubi from Interview IA, and this is a Higher Future podcast, and I'm here with Nicole as always. Hi, Nicole.
Hey, Yubi, who are we talking to today?
So we are talking to a dear friend, someone who we've known for a few years now here in the Colorado area. Aleta Jeffress is from CGI. She's the Vice President of Consulting Services there. We met you, Aleta, when, gosh, way back at City of Aurora days, when you were CIO over there. And so, hello, first of all, it looks like you just got back from a hike in Vail.
Hey, good to see you. Yes, I wish that would have been lovely, but not quite today.
Well, it's great to have you, and I mean, there's so many things we can talk about today, and I think, well, first of all, tell everybody a little bit about just kind of what you're doing with CGI. Like, what's your role? And what's been going on the last year in terms of the pandemic?
Sure, absolutely. So, I've been at CGI almost a year, just a little bit over a year actually. And so I like to say I started about the same time the pandemic did, right? And so
Right.
when you start a new role at a new company and it's completely remote, that's kind of an interesting situation when that's not really how the role is structured or how the company's even worked to date. But we can talk a little bit more about that later. But if you don't know CGI, they are an international company and they've done a lot of work in systems integration and consulting, a lot of business agility, transformation, digitalization work. So they really have a number of clients from state and local to commercial and just a wide breadth of services and offerings. So like I said, I've been there about a year and I currently focus on some of the state and local work for Colorado and also Arizona, as well as kind of helping out in the commercial area as well. So, I think from their perspective or from a kind of a large corporation perspective, we have 75,000 employees,
Wow.
internationally. And so when you think about trying to manage a group like that through a pandemic, right, you're doing things like the rest of us have all done, right? We went to Teams, so that was an evolution after I was there not too long. And so you just learn how to manage your time a little bit different and be more intentional about reaching out across maybe what your local area would be, because now it's easier, and now everybody's kind of on that same playing field. But they've really focused a lot on helping companies and helping organizations pivot as well, because when the pandemic happened, there were lots of things that impacted call centers, people who couldn't go to work. So we picked up some of that call center work, right? We picked up a lot of digitalization work because people had to have like immediate reactions to what was happening. So making sure that their processes were better, they were more agile. Now we're looking at a lot of like the human centered design component as people continue to kind of evolve their process and what they're trying to get to as quote the new normal. So
Mm.
will you be heading back into the office anytime soon?
Yeah.
We do not have a date for return to work, so return to office. So I don't know yet.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've probably had this similar experience to a lot of other people. I mean, you started a new job and some folks out there did too. I did, and it is a very different experience to do
Mhm.
that remotely. But I suspect that we're not all going back to work. And from what we talked to you about before we got started here is, that 50% of people don't ever plan on going back to the office. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, I think again, looking at kind of the worldwide scope and then even specific to Colorado, as we've talked with customers, they've definitely shifted their focus. So, anywhere between 40-50%, some of the organizations are like, we're not going to require people to be in the office. Some of them have already sold off all of their real estate or, changed their leasing agreements to either downsize or eliminate them completely. And so, they've just really accepted that as a way to lower expenses, and they've continued to be able to be productive. So they don't really see it as a bad thing. It's just a different way to achieve their mission.
From the company perspective, I can see how, this is an agile thing, everyone's shifting. From the city perspective, it makes me worried for our bigger cities. Are our cities at risk of dying?
I don't know about dying, at least not the big ones, because I do think that there will still always be kind of this core, right, to a downtown. That's something that's very needed, I think, even in smaller cities and bigger cities, because by nature, people like to congregate, right? They like to make sure that there's a place to go. We all want to go to concerts again, right? So there still has to be a place where we can do things like that. But I think what will change more significantly is the day-to-day servicing that citizens have in a government setting, because no longer maybe do you need to quote go downtown or go to the municipal building to pay a bill or to submit plans for development or get a new permit for building. I think a lot of that type of activity will has already moved virtual and just will continue to move virtual because it's really just an easier way to do business. I think too, the consumer experience, which government has always kind of lagged behind consumer in what citizens experience. You have how many apps are in the app store that you can use for a variety of things. And governments, even the innovative ones, you might get a couple out there, but not like 40, that you might have to work with. But now they've had to react and they've had to up their game and really develop ways to interact with citizens that you have to be able to do on a phone or you have to be able to do on an iPad or a mobile device. So, I think that shift will be permanent and allowing citizens to engage that way and kind of reducing that kind of footprint of brick and mortar.
It sounds like a lot of work needs to be done now to catch up with what's about to happen, where people don't intend to go back to the office, will work
Mhm,
from home or other places. And
mhm.
so, let's just look at that a little bit. The changes in buildings, internet infrastructure, like you're talking about, government services. What have you seen specifically?
Well, I think the infrastructure change started early, right away. I had mentioned to you earlier, when about in the June timeframe, even while everyone's sitting at home, you can see all the trucks go by, right? Trying to really make sure people have internet, make sure neighborhoods are upgraded because everybody's at home and everybody's on next door chirping about, how good or bad their
Mhm.
internet service is and asking questions. So, I think from that perspective, big companies have had to realize this is now a necessity. That drove a lot of broadband conversation, drove a lot of rural broadband conversation and funding actually to make sure that some of those communities that maybe before, didn't have really good internet options, now I think they have funding and more options for how to do that, which means also that the people who are working, they're going to change locations. Like you said, they could work from the coffee shop, they can work from the mountains, they can work from the beach. And we've seen articles about people who have just up and moved or rented homes somewhere else on the beach for a year, while they work through that. And so that's kind of a big scale, but I think even on a local scale, how people interact day to day. Like before, we would get up, we would drive to work, we would stop and get coffee, stop and get donuts, whatever it is. And on the way home, we would do the reverse. We'd stop at the grocery store, stop and get gas. Well, none of that's happening between, 7 and 9 and 5 and 7 anymore, right? So, what does that look like for how a city evolves? What does that look like for their footprint and their business development? Because business development plans might have been sold 2 years ago with this kind of traffic pattern in mind. Well, guess what? Now the traffic pattern is completely different. And so, what does that mean for those businesses who are kind of on the fringe? But yet, when you do new development, that's even more impactful because now, greenfield developments, their internet requirements will probably be different, or they have to recognize that there's different traffic patterns, or how do they reach out, or maybe they don't need as much office space or footprint. So lots of considerations, I think, with that.
Yeah, it seems overwhelming in a sense. It's like, oh my God, we
Lot to
just
think
put this
about.
whole plan together. Yeah. But it kind of puts the focus on the conversation, which we've talked a lot about this, even with different guests too. But the focus really is shifting to people.
Mhm.
And I think that's what's kind of interesting and cool here is that corporations are finally having to understand their people's needs, their people's behaviors more than ever. And they're going to have to even
Mhm.
hire for that once they get that their head around that understanding, then they have to continue to hire. But it's really, the focus is now on the people. It's not about the technology necessarily anymore. I mean, sure, technology to support the people, but at the end of the day, it goes back to the people. Like, what is that? How, I don't know. What's the future of work because of that?
Well, and I think that's a great point, UB, is because again, we had this knee-jerk reaction to get technology in place and make sure we could talk
Hmm.
to each other and see each other and all of that. And now it is, oh my gosh, well, these people who live by themselves or maybe are more physically remote, how do we make sure those people are engaged? How do we make sure that they have resources that they need? How do we make sure everybody still remains mentally healthy? Because you know that although everybody's super productive, now we're seeing, meetings starting at 7, meetings ending at 6, and your day just happens to get a little bit longer. And I think that there's definitely a swing to more work, but then we're recognizing that's not sustainable either. So how do we
Hmm.
pull people back into kind of more of that, maybe normal work week? I was even talking with an organization the other day, and they said that, how you used to have jeans day, like that used to be a reward. Well, now they have no video day. Like that's a prize when you when you can go to work
Yes.
and not have to be on video, which I thought was
How
really cool.
funny.
So, but I think to that point, how do you take care of people and recognize, for me personally, managing people, I became very aware that, maybe for those people who especially had kids in school, I don't need to schedule time between like 8 and 8:45, or I didn't schedule
Hmm.
meetings between like 3 and 4 because people needed to be able to pick up their kids or get them settled or, whatever their routine is, and really be respectful of that, because a lot of times they're still doing work at 6 or 7. So I think just being more forgiving, maybe, or more
Yeah.
just recognizing what's important to one person is going to be different than what's important to somebody else, and just kind of working through that like you would with any relationship. But I think being very intentional about it with your employees is something that will be a skill set that we'll need to continue to work on.
It's funny because Nicole, like what, the work that you do, like around behavioral transformation, right? I mean, this is like behavioral transformation at its finest. I mean, it's like Mother Earth was like, you know what? We need to change some behaviors, and here's how we're going to do it.
Mhm.
The
It's
the
fascinating.
funny thing is that the external transformation, the forced transformation, isn't true transformation. So if you think
Yeah.
about like a character in a movie, that character, if you put them in a different environment, say season 3, something weird happens to them, and they just respond to it, they didn't
Hmm.
change as a character. They're just responding to their environment. But then
Mhm.
you have like the round character in literature, the round character actually changes their perspective on the world. And so I'm wondering, there's some people that are just dealing with what's coming at them, and nothing in their world has changed in terms of their response. They're just responding to totally different things. And then some people have dramatically shifted their perspective on life and everything, and they will never be the same. They will continue to evolve because of what's happened over the last year or so. And it's gonna be really interesting to see how those two different groups of people get back into a totally new. It's not back. We're not going back. We're now
Right.
just evolving into a whole different paradigm of something, even not, it's not in the office, it's not out of the office, it's going to be half in, half out, different.
It's just, but I agree. That's a great point because, you think about major events that have happened over time, like even 9/11, right? And how many people picked up and sailed around the world or whatever it is that they did as a result of that, knowing that, they just needed to do something different or they were stuck in a rut. And I think everybody's with COVID because it's so long. I think people's tolerance, or everybody has a different point at which they've now decided, okay, I've had enough, and so I'm either going to continue to quote, respond or react, versus, well, look, this is how I can do business now, or this is the kind of business I need to do because of COVID. Those people who've been able to respond that way on the business side, I think some of that's fascinating, as well, just different opportunities and how they've timed. But everybody, everybody has a different sense and a different time, and they need to kind of work through that on their own terms.
Well, and I think it's going to be interesting to see which businesses truly survive and then shine
Hmm.
compared to those who don't, because of a combination of that that kind of external transformation or reaction, but also then the intentional internal transformation necessary to kind of keep going in the right direction or to fully adapt. I think
Hmm.
it's going to be fascinating to see, because we've already seen how many businesses close down within the last year alone because of the pandemic. And some things are out of your hands, but it's just, I don't know, it's fascinating. It's really going to truly alter things
Hmm.
permanently, much more so. And it's just such a grand way.
Right. No, I agree. It will be fascinating to watch and to see how people engage with some of those outcomes, because everybody, change is hard and people don't like change and it can be exhausting. But for the people who really embrace that and move it forward, I think those people they'll just go gangbusters, right?
Hmm.
It'll be a whole new wave of thinking, I think, at that point.
So it's obvious that the culture of work will change, and art culture is sort of an art, right? There's in
Hmm.
terms of for getting a culture to change in a way that you want it to. But the other thing that's also an art that I've heard you speak on in the past is security. And I'm wondering what you see in terms of new security issues that are arising, security issues that need to be artfully addressed differently than they have been in the past.
Hmm. I think that security is an art. If it were as black and white as maybe we liked, nothing would work because it would all be locked down. But
Right.
I think that there's always a challenge, especially with really established organizations or technology, right? That we've seen this where the back end of the technology doesn't really change, but there's a really pretty front end. And we think we've transformed, and we really haven't. So, and you see this in a lot of legacy industries, but I think now is the time where maybe we maybe got through kind of this knee jerk reaction of trying to deal with unemployment insurance, for example, right? There's a lot that went into that, affected a lot of people, a lot of activity around that. But we really need to change how the system and the business process works, because what we have in a lot of states, what we took and tried to morph it to adapt to people and give them the services that they need, right? It was very important. People needed that, all of that support, but it didn't allow for just the amount of fraud that could come out of that as well. I mean, I personally was frauded through unemployment insurance. And the interesting part about going through that process was, I could go on to the website and I could say, here's my information and here's what happened. And some of that probably behind the scenes is still pretty old school. But when you go to file a police report or when you go and do some of the more current things, that was all automated, all online. Here's the email that I got. So it's kind of interesting to see how, here's kind of the old institution and how this works, but yet here's how some of the newer players or the newer people who have to manage that and respond to it, how they've kind of interacted. So, I think we've all seen more phishing emails. We've all seen, weird things come across. Like I mentioned, I got 4 different emails from different vendors saying I needed to renew my security for a product that I don't even have. And so some people I think have become more cognizant of that because that's the volume of it is just so much more. But I think still coming back and looking at our underlying architectures and how do we really secure those. And it's probably time to overhaul some of those. And yet at the same time, I've also been fortunate to see some younger security companies come in with just some phenomenal solutions, right? That they've been able to adapt to in the last 18 months and be flexible with and recognize that this is a new normal. And how do we make sure that things are locked down and people are protected and companies are protected, right? So I do think there's a lot of new solutions out there that again we need to talk about and look at and evaluate in existing infrastructures.
Hmm. There's a lot. There's
There
a
is.
lot that
It's
there's
been a
a
busy
lot.
year.
It's been a busy.
Never mind the
It's
pandemic, but it's been a busy
right.
year.
Uh, hey, first of all, happy 20th wedding anniversary
Oh,
to you and
thank you so
Brandon.
much.
Is that
Same to
Brandon in the
you.
background? Oh, well, thank you. Is that him in the bush there? Like I can't tell
He's
if that's
Probably
him or
back
fishing.
not.
there fishing somewhere.
Well, this was an awesome discussion. Thank you for being on the show. I think I don't know, a continuing trend I see is kind of this focus on people now, which is really
Mhm.
kind of awesome. And, if anything comes out of the pandemic and bringing up conversations about systemic inequalities and everything that
Oh,
happened after
right.
George Floyd's murder last year, that there is, I think, this renewed focus on the right thing moving forward, and so that's what's really exciting. So thank you. It's great to see you.
Oh, thank you. Nice to see you. Pleasure to talk with you, Nicole and you guys take care.
You
All
too, and
right.
thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, check out the podcast for more great episodes. A Higher Future. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.